All right, so today's webinar is all about blueprinting your environment, application environment for DR purposes, and in particular, in terms of doing the blueprinting for application resilience, right? And we are one of the providers. We pioneered this market, and that's becoming very useful, particularly given the situation that's happening in the market more and more about ransomware attacks. Of course, you could use it for other purposes from a DR perspective, but one of the biggest problems that we see, uh, with regular um, situations now is that more and more environments are getting attacked by ransomware. In fact, about 2 weeks ago, a CIO gave us a call around 4:46 a.m. in the morning. All right, and then we put our team online to be able to recover from an encryption attack of their entire cloud environment. All their 16 different resource groups and subscriptions were affected, and they couldn't even log into their environments completely. Their AD was affected, and just imagine that panic in the middle of the night or very early in the morning in this particular case. And not all his support teams and infrastructure and application teams and everyone else were available to be able to recover their environment, right? And our system was able to recover everything in about 36 minutes, and literally their business was back online, right, without losing data, the environment configuration, all of that. So they are really appreciative of what we could do. But if you think about it, think about that situation. How did they get into that problem? And that is not new. They are not alone, and day in, day out, you see problems everywhere. um, Even the critical systems for a nation, right, are being attacked as we speak. And that all starts with some kind of network, surface attack at the periphery of the network, or through email or some other means. Assume that you're always on attack through some kind of an actor, some kind of a event that is triggering all of that. And then second thing, what happens is that credentials are being stolen, or the AD, an Active Directory from Microsoft and similar systems might be under attack. And all the sometimes what happens is the backup systems are under attack as well, because these sophisticated hackers, they know that by getting to the backup systems themselves, the backup consoles, if you are not protecting properly, then everything is completely off the mark. You cannot even recover your systems back from those so-called backup systems, right? And then data exfiltration and so many other things happen. So that's a common scenario. We are not going to go deeper into ransomware attack scenarios as a whole. The idea is that how do we how can we prevent it to an extent, right? We cannot be prepared all the time. Second thing is that how can we recover, right? How can we recover our entire application environment, all the configurations and all the data, the critical data for your applications, all of that are critical, from getting back your business, and also continue to protect going forward, right? Once an attack happens, and then you are vulnerable after that. You're not able to sleep peacefully. So this particular customer, what they did is that they separated their environment into green zone, where after the recovery, all their applications configuration, their environment all started running, and they located all of that and marked that as a green zone, right? They kept the red zone where the actual attack really happened, for forensics purposes, right? To be able to go back and check out what really happened. How did the hackers really come through our network, and what really happened. So those are the things that they are going through. But at the end of the day, right? And the ability to recover your application environments. In particular, we are talking about cloud application environments here, right? I'm not talking about on-prem environment and so on, because relevant to Appranix is the cloud application environments, and that's what we protect. So we'll talk about cloud application environments. And if you look at the cloud application environments today, let's assume that you migrated your application or started afresh, something new, cloud native, right? A few months ago, a few years ago, and so on. It all starts simple, right? You start with the bare minimum VPC, and then configurations around that VPC, all the minimal workload. So it might look like this, right? I'm using one of the environments, and you start off slow, and then you include your DevOps pipeline if you are a DevOps oriented organization, and then the environment start changing. Kind of complicated really quickly. And this particular environment has about 3 different zones, multiple VMs, multiple PaaS database services, and so many load balancer instances and configurations and so on. They are all kind of getting complicated, right? So if you're dealing with a section of this environment, you can understand you may not be able to see the entire application blueprint. I mean, this is one particular application for a fintech company. I've been doing mortgages forever. It's about $20 billion per quarter and so on. So it's critical for them, right? And they've been running in 3 different zones in one particular region of the cloud, in this particular case, AWS. And that environment is made up of so many different configuration dependencies and so on. So the simplest question is, what's your blueprint? Have you had the opportunity to really look at how your application environments have come together, right? How are they changing? I'm assuming that the changes happen through multiple DevOps pipelines, or through the cloud console, where just because we have access to the console, you go and modify certain configurations, let's say VPC configurations or security group configurations, or even the parameter groups of an RDS system, right? There are so many parameter groups. You simply modify a public shared PaaS system to be able to customize to your requirement, and which means some kind of a change into the configuration through maybe Terraform pipeline or some other mechanism, right? So all kinds of changes happen, and network teams might come in through the API CLI mechanism because they are comfortable with API or CLI. Through scripting mechanism, they might change a section of your network to be able to allow certain things to for the application teams, right? And then third-party tools modify your environment as well. So in essence, first of all, these environments are very, very dynamic, not like the olden days where, a particular system administrator is managing about 200 systems and a storage administrator managing about a petabyte, right? Again, I'm just putting some examples out there. If you have been in IT for a long time, we all started with 100 terabytes. Able to manage a few hundred terabytes per storage administrator, a few hundred systems, or maybe 10 physical machines at the time. Now, 200 VMs per system administrator. You can only do so much in a particular day to be able to, first of all, secure, second of all, protect. Again, I'm separating out security and as protection. Protection means a backup as well. And then, to be able to protect against disasters. And nowadays, disasters, in particular on the cloud environments, are from a natural disaster perspective are not that much, but from ransomware attack perspective, right, is crucial nowadays, right? And that is really forcing people to rethink and understand what their environment is made up of, how that environment is changing. Are you able to really what we call blueprinting of that environment, so that you have an understanding of your own configurations, your own applications, your own changes that are happening so that you keep track of all of that. Then the question comes is that how resilient are your cloud applications? Right? That's the biggest thing, right? And then if you think about that definition itself, resiliency comes because you are able to recover that environment really, really quickly from failures, to any kind of failure for that matter, right? What that means is that could be backing up your systems, not necessarily just those little VMs. If you think about those little VMs, not little from actual size perspective, but from this particular picture perspective, small. And databases and in a complicated dynamic application environment, those are all pieces, important pieces of infrastructure, and just protecting those individual componentry is not sufficient, right? So yes, you have to do backup. Yes, you have to be able to do DR of not only just the VMs, but also the application images, because the changes that are going into those application libraries need to be properly protected as well. And of course, the data changes, replication of the data to another location of the cloud. Luckily, cloud has enough locations to be able to replicate, right? And other cloud resources as well. I'm talking about load balancers, the gateways, the pass systems, and the security groups even. So if that's the case, you somehow keep that environment kind of up and running in your production using, Terraform or Cloud Formation or Azure Resource Templates and so on. Now, how do you get ready? Can you create additional environments? Maybe you can spread between two different availability zones for some systems. Is that sufficient? Going beyond that, can you actually run another similar environment in another region of the cloud? And what's the cost associated with additional environments? What's the cost associated with managing, maintaining those additional environments? Right? Those questions come into play after assuming that you have actually understood your environment and continuously keep track of the environment, blueprint the environment to be able to understand the architecture of your applications as well. So all of those are very important from the protection as well as the recovery perspective. And cloud helps a lot. All the cloud providers, they continue to improve not only the infrastructure, the availability of that infrastructure as well. Even though the services might differ in terms of SLAs, some services might offer 99.99% SLA. Some might offer only 99.95. Some are just 99.9 or less than that sometimes, right? Depending on the availability, and then fine prints, all of the good things. But cloud doesn't offer everything for your application. When it comes to your applications, you are responsible for taking over the burden of that resilience, right? Which means that those applications could come down anytime for any number of reasons, right? You have to simply assume the worst and then work backwards to see what can you protect, how can you protect, what are the components that are involved in terms of that protection. Is it because of ransomware attack? Of course, you can only do so much in terms of understanding and then protecting, right? And misconfigurations happen a lot. Ton of misconfiguration. Just imagine that previous picture where the configuration changes are occurring. And then there are tools coming up in the market in terms of identifying the misconfiguration to be able to go back to the previous configurations. If you really practiced a discipline of the DevOps and to be able to go back in time, that's all great, managing production. But how about the DR environment, where if something were to happen, how can you really kind of bring up those environments somewhere else? And it could be because of regional failures, or it could be because a zonal failure or a particular service, cloud service failure, right? And the worst case scenario, complete natural disaster because of a lightning strike, Azure data center goes down. What am I supposed to do, right? It affects your business clearly. I mean, I cannot explain how much On average is about 300K according to Gartner per hour, right? But that may not be the right thing to say, depending on your type of business. Your situation could be completely off the charts, right? And then you throw in your precious engineering resources and time. It's like crazy, especially when it happens. I know we have seen that happening with our customers, right? Everyone jumps in, including the CIO is on the call every hour to make sure that they can recover their applications quickly. And obviously, you could rely on some of the tools that are already there. You could potentially bring your data center designed backup and recovery systems, even though those systems are, you have to install and maintain, and you will have to um, discover your environment and feed that information to those systems, so that you can protect those VMs. What happens when the auto scaling scenario happens, right? You configure the auto scaling properties in a particular zone under the load balancer. Now, if the systems are automatically spun up to be able to accommodate the user needs, the performance needs of your application, then who is going to tell the backup and replication systems to be able to go and protect those systems, right? To be able to protect the network configurations that are changing at the time, so that if an attack happens an hour before or a day before, then the ability to go back in time is very critical. And that's why Appranix was created, right? From the ground up, with cloud applications in mind, with auto scaling, dynamically changing, DevOps oriented application environments. If you don't have infrastructure as code, no problem, right? You might be managing based on your whatever the comfortable tools that you might be using at the time or today, and having a plan to go towards that. And you might be writing some scripts and so on. So that's all great. But we are dealing with a situation where if you have an ability to automatically blueprint for DR purposes that avoids complicated manual risky run books and so on, then you would think about utilizing that approach. If not for anything else, this particular webinar is all about education, right? Knowledge is power. If you have that a tool in your toolbox, you might understand, okay, so it may be an approach. This approach could work. And a lot of people come and say that, oh, well, we understand what we used to use in the data center. It's totally fine. But when it came to the cloud, we thought, we have a much better approach. Let's drop all the technical debt that we gathered, and then hopefully we can get rid of them at some point in time, right? But when it comes to the old approach, is that it assumes that, right, you have created the entire network before the recovery starts. You put it in the run book. Okay, so go and create that so-called VPC with the same configuration. Maybe I'm able to clone that VPC. So assuming that you have cloned, assuming that you have put together some kind of an application environment, meaning that you have to know what kind of sizes of the VMs that are running in your production environment, and what are the configurations, how do they talk to each other, right? Because blueprint means that you might have some kind of a manual blueprinting chart that you might have Visio diagrams that you might have created, right? That's all great, but at a particular point in time, maybe when you migrated your application to the cloud, so assuming that you can put together the environment, what this legacy approach really takes is that you have the pre-created network. Now you're bringing back those VMs one at a time, or multiple VMs together at a time, right? That's the approach. That was the approach before this application resilience oriented approach came in, where what if you have the possibility to click a button and get the entire application environment with all the dependencies, all the configurations, all the application images that are captured incrementally, all your scale sets, all your auto scaling configurations are all created automatically. Wouldn't it be nice to avoid that complete DR runbook, not the business side of the equation, but at least the technical DR runbook. If it is ready, if it is updated, if it is coded automatically, wouldn't be nice, right? And that's what in terms of capabilities wise. So if you think about your environment, no code changes, production changes necessary. Just imagine that you don't have to even install agents. You don't have to have a primary backup manager and protecting all your environment, and then you have a replicated backup manager in another region. Again, you're maintaining all of that. And then if you're bringing in some replication product for the DR, you have to manage those things. So several things that happen. And with Appranix, you don't have to have any of this, right? You simply log in, assuming that you have an account, you're protecting, you recover. Right? That's simple, right? If that's the case, how do you really do that? Just assume that you have an environment, cloud application environment, multiple application environments. We have seen a single VPC with 16,498 resources. I mean, pretty much in SF. Yesterday, there was one environment that had that kind of a number of resources, and a single VPC, single account. On the other hand, we have seen like 102 AWS accounts with 3 different VPCs in every one of these accounts, right? And multiple applications running there. So we have seen all kinds of shared VPCs across 2 different AWS accounts. And this is a older mechanism within AWS, and people still use it. Not a single AWS account, multiple AWS accounts, right? So all kinds of complicated configurations, and we have seen as many as you might have imagined. Like there's so many different ways you can configure. Assuming that those environments are changing, those environments are scaling automatically, those environments are spread out across multiple zones. Appranix goes and discovers this environment and creates a blueprint automatically, keeps a blueprint, keeps up with the changes all the time. Just imagine you have a cloud time machine. And so Appranix maintains that cloud time machine with no agents installed. Because if you start putting an agent, you will get, I don't want to go into the route of agents, right? It's just an old mechanism. Legacy approach of putting an agent just because you get some benefits, but it negates the purpose of, at least from a resiliency perspective, you don't have to. Right? And that doesn't mean that you get rid of the existing backup. No, you can continue to run your backup because you might be comfortable with the backup provider. You trust them. You have the data with them for ages. So you continue to use them, totally fine. But for other areas of your application, you can start with those, a newer approach. Right? And then Appranix automatically backs up all the metadata of your environment. The size of the VM, the tags, and the connectivity, the security groups, the IP address, all of that, right? All the network services are backed up. Who backs up network services? The question is, why didn't we back up those network services? Seems to be a good idea, right? Then when it comes down to the data copy, actual application data copy, Appranix doesn't take your proprietary application data copies. We only take the metadata. Your application data are copied from one region to another region or multiple regions based on your configuration requirement, forever incrementally, so that you have copies stored in the production region in the same zone, if you will, so that you can quickly recover back a particular VM if the VM is dead or database is dead, right? Or quick changes that happen because of an application update and so on, or for other purposes completely in a different region, you should be able to recover the entire environment. And Appranix makes sure that all the infrastructure as code is automatically written so that you don't have to worry about these complicated DR runbooks. Because if you ever went through that DR runbook, you would know the complexity. I used to deal with them. Right? I have a couple of patents as well in kind of creating resiliency for enterprise applications. The issue is that by the time you're done with a particular DR runbook, it's completely outdated. right? And it's kind of useless if you think about it, because you can never guarantee that it's going to work, even if you follow step by step, because there's going to be some IP address that is so mismatched somewhere else in your application configuration that just because of that, your application is not talking and application screens are not coming up. There's always that little thing, right? Even though you might have this 50-page run book and you're so proud of it, and then you would think back that, why did I waste my time? And that's where this cloud application resilience approach is much better. It is now possible because cloud makes it possible. So why not take advantage of it, right? But when it comes down to your actual application data, Appranix automatically incrementally copies all the data using the cloud built-in capabilities. So using cloud data infrastructure, Appranix uses all of that to give you that good data management capabilities to be able to protect incrementally, so that even if those virtual machines die, crash, if they restart, you don't have to worry about what really happened with the agent. So you don't have to go through that full copy again. Just imagine copying, 15 disks oriented VM again. Unheard of. I mean, why do we need to go through that again? We all know the data sizes are increasing. Data gravity is real. So why go through that pain instead of just incrementally copying all of that quickly to the other side, right? And Appranix makes sure that it not only copies, keeps a copy in your local region, but also copying incrementally again to another region. And that's it in terms of cost-wise, right? So incremental snapshot are kept in the right places so that when required, you can bring back all of the resources on demand completely so that you can test your recoveries. In the worst case scenario, from a ransomware attack, you can recover away from the red zone, right? So all the data copies are crucial and managed within your own accounts. The great thing about cloud, then now you have the entire world is open. Of course, data sovereignty is important. So depending on the situation, you might want to copy within your own continent. Right? If you're a globally spread out company operating in multiple countries, then it's totally fine. You're a customer of ours is copying from all the way from Singapore over to Ireland, right? Just imagine that. That's a possibility now, right? Instead of going from here to Hong Kong or Japan or even to Australia, they are copying all the way from here, Singapore, right, over to Ireland, right? So that's all available. All these regions and the networks are becoming faster and faster and faster, thanks to the cloud, thanks to the hyperscaling capability of the cloud. Continuous improvement demanded by so many of these large organizations, and that's now possible, which means that instead of just talking about typical backup, right, it's a feature. Typical replication, it's a feature. Now we can talk about entire application environment, and we can talk about application resilience. Let's move to that level, right, as opposed to talking about, do I have to have 4 NICs in a VM or a physical server to be able to create 15 other VMs for my test dev purposes? I mean, do we have to really worry about that anymore? In other words, do I have to really worry about how the copies are made from an application data perspective? Right? Can I simply just call an API and make sure that the copies get over to the other side? Can I trust that copy? Right? The question is, can I get somebody else to actually do it for me? I will pay for it a little bit, right? Incrementally. I want to control my data. I want to control my application data. But if there is a possibility to be able to bring back my application environment and all my data intact at a particular point in time, as of like last week, everything was running okay. then perhaps, we might want to think about it. If that's the case, suddenly you start expanding your vision. Or can I use this functionality for other purposes? Right? What about cloning my environment for my test dev purposes? Cloning multiple copies of the zero footprint from a data perspective, zero footprint copies. Right? Until you start writing the data into the new copy, you don't really incur any cost except the compute and other things that you can get rid of. You're anyway making some, clones. Why can't we just make the clones with actual real world data at that particular point in time and then get rid of it once the test is done? Same mechanism, right? What if I go from one region to another region because my customers are in a different country, but all my application changes are happening in one country, and I want to just deploy the new environment with the new data, customize it for that particular country or region or continent. That's all possible now, right? So with that, let's not talk about pricing and other things. It's all about education here, right? And let's get on to some kind of a demo as well, that you'll have a complete idea of what you can actually achieve on the cloud. So just imagine that you are running, I'm taking AWS as an example here, right? I mean, you can pretty much do that with, on Azure or Google Cloud. It's the same thing everywhere. And I'm using something called Open EMR, right? Emergency Medical Record Application, or Electronic Health Records Application. It's critical for hospitals, so you can run it across multiple instances. And the database is in the back end. If you take a simple database like an RDS, and if you look at parameter groups, I'm not digging into subnet groups and options groups. There may be other configurations, but parameter groups is an interesting one, right? These parameter groups, like so many different configurations, right? And this is like 15 of them in one page. And obviously, if I go across like 30 different pages, or like 460 different configurations, if I simply mistyped one of those, can you imagine that? Right? Application will not work. And I go into VPC, and my head starts spinning, because apart from multiple VPCs that I can create, and hopefully I can keep track of all of that, and then the subnets and the route tables, the gateways, and DHCP option sets. Really? I mean, I may have to keep up with these changes as well. Yes, if you're operating on the cloud, right? And then AWS in particular keeps releasing something new every day. Like last year, they changed about 68 different instance types, because new computer chips are coming in, ARM or Intel, it doesn't matter, right? There's a new way to reduce the cost, because you can go to the newer versions of the systems to optimize your application based on, we do that all the time. We are running on the cloud as well, multiple regions and so on, and we do that. So those systems change, those changes occur all the time, right? Can I afford to really test all of this? And now the question is, what's my application blueprint? Right? I'm just looking at like 3 or 4, screens of AWS, right? And now the question is, all right, I understand all of that are important, and somehow we are running the application. And how do I really see that? Is it that, or is it like the small? I have no idea. Right? Now the question is, all right, something went bad, and I have to really bring back, and this is a test that so you can see all these application environments are completely terminated or not load balancers in California. So I'm going to fail over from Virginia to California, right? Entire OpenEMR. And I can use all kinds of services on AWS, and similarly on Azure as well. So if you look at that same OpenEMR as a resource group, right? This is a resource group, a multiple resource group that we are running. Go into the resource groups and say OpenEMR, and there is one resource group that's running. And then if you go into that resource group, there's like 38 different records, right? Simple configuration. If you go into one of the NSGs, network security group, there's so many different configurations there, right? And go into GCP and go into any of these environments here. It's OpenEMR. I'm running OpenEMR front end, OpenEMR back end. Every one of these instances are made up so many different configurations, right? The configuration management database is not even sufficient to be able to understand what's going on. And it changes, right? And that's when you realize that you need something. So you go and buy from the marketplace, subscribe, assuming that you have an account, you log in, you nicely get a dashboard that says, okay, so that, when you're not protecting anything in Appranix, nothing will show up here except list of things that you can do, a nice guide to be able to say, connect your cloud environment, right? Cloud account, add a cloud connection, select your cloud, select your primary region, select your recovery regions. I talked about multiple regions. Oh, I want to go to Asia Pacific. Oh, there is a new data center that opened recently in Singapore, Canadian region or European region. Just imagine, right? That checkbox is your DR location now. So you select all of that, create a cloud connection. A cloud connection looks like this, right? Appranix automatically discovers all the services going to the compute, going to the compute metadata. This is all we take, encrypted 256 bit encryption, in flight, at rest, all of that. All your data within your EBS volumes are staying within your account. But we understand it's an encrypted, you can encrypt the primary region, keep your keys. We don't touch your keys. You can have different keys in the primary region and a recovery region. Another way to protect, maybe additional way to protect. Cloud allows you to do that, right? Option groups for this particular environment. Internet gateways, all of that for a 6 VM environment is about 133 different resources are getting discovered all the time. And you represent your particular application. If you have an application running in one VM, that's totally fine. But that one VM doesn't mean that it's going to depend on only one load balancer. Yes, it could be, but it could be depending on so many EBS volumes and so many other resources. Do I have to manually assemble? Nope. You don't have to worry about creating a blueprint. All you have to do is to say, right, take the top level instances or even send in the tags. These are my application resources, tag them, ask your developers to tag them. It's Appranix responsibility to be able to assemble, to be able to understand the dependencies so that you can completely avoid this so-called DR runbook, technical runbook. And with respect to backup and replication and recovery, all you have to do is to put a name, select hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, stack them up together, 30 minutes, 15 minutes. A customer is copying their entire application environment, very important, critical, from one region to another region every 15 minutes. It is possible, right? Then you retain number of copies in the primary region and another set of copies in another region. This is just one policy, hourly policy. You can put a weekly policy, retain as many copies as you like. It's all incremental, by the way, right? So you've made a weekly copy and daily copy and hourly copy and a 15 minutes copy. Only the changes are going back and forth, in fact, in one region, right? So you simply create multiple, or you can take it from a policy template quickly. And once you add them up, if you look at other policy templates as an example here, you can go into policy. There are so many policies here, right? It was actually created two years ago. We have been protecting for demo purpose for 2 years plus, right? So likewise, you simply select that, and then tell Appranix to create the time machine. This is the time machine. You might have thought it's so complicated, right? I present it as if it's a big deal here, right? Like a time machine is a simple concept, but it's not anything complicated like this, right? It looks innocent, but underneath, all the complexities are taken care of. The compute and all the discoveries are happening in your primary region, making sure that you can bring up the entire environment in another region. Only the data copies are going in, as I mentioned in the other slide. Data copies, all other metadata copies are only kept so minimal, right? Assume that you ran into a situation as of an hour ago. Everything was running just an hour ago, or it was running okay a week ago, right? And look at my RPO. The same region is just 6 minutes, the entire application environment, and copy to another one, it takes another 5 minutes. So looks like my copies are available. I don't want to touch my primary region, and it is away from your production environment. This is your backup console. It's running somewhere else with multiple multi-factor authentication, so MFA enabled, your SSO enabled, all of that. So it's another set of copies somewhere else, sitting protected somewhere else. You're not even dialing into your primary region of AWS. You log into Appranix, simply say recover, right? And DR blueprint recovery. And I can recover in the same region if you're looking for a particular resource, right? I want to just get one resource back. It's totally fine. Or I can put it in the same VPC where your production is running, or existing VPC that is dedicated for DR purposes, or completely create a new VPC for DR cloning, or go to another region completely, West Coast. You can create a new VPC or an existing VPC because you might have connected to your data center and so on. Simply say click, then recover, because you need to tell us with capital letters that you can recover Appranix, all the resources. Until that point, no load balancers, right? No instances. It's all terminated one from the previous demo, by the way. So none of that. Then you can reset after an hour. After 4 hours, if you're just doing some kind of a performance test and so on. Say click that button, right? And if you think about it, it's bringing up the internet gateways, application load balancers, subnets, the network load balancers, the route tables, the VPCs, all of that, right? The compute security groups. Are you really worried about what was the blueprint of your application environment, the configurations of that? So what's happening is that Appranix automatically wrote something, DR blueprint recovery, and the resources are coming up, let it. But in the end, Appranix automatically programmed your environment as of June 18th, right? All the data at that particular point in time. So all of that code, including the dependencies, right? Did you keep track of all those dependencies? What was my CIDR block at the time? What was my IP address with the CIDR block within my private IP range? What was the port to do a load balance check? How do I know at that particular point in time, right? And if you think about it, that environment has been created. And if you go into that environment, look at the instances, look at the configurations, and that little thing automatically gives me an idea. That was my load balancer. As of June 18th, hopefully there was nothing that happened there. And how do I go back to that one? It's a different load balancer. What was this configuration? It's a subnet. Okay, so that subnet is very useful because I didn't have an understanding of that subnet, right? Again, we are leveraging all the cloud. You are not going out, right? So you're comfortable. You're comfortable with respect to understanding your environment, and if it is AWS, we automatically program and give you that control. If it is Azure, you program the same thing, right? All I have to do is go back to an Azure assembly and then do the same thing, right? Recover now, other region, from Central to East Coast, no difference, right? And once you're done with that, you have recoveries are happening. You can fire off multiple recoveries as well to be able to understand, what's happening with respect to that particular recovery over a period of time. Obviously, I triggered a weekly one, so recovery is happening right here. And 46 resources from that environment and 39 are already recovered. Recovered resources will show up here. And if you want to send in the complaints, you can go back to Resilience Insights and say recovery report. I love to pick certain things like going back to November, June 2020. It's not 2022. I thought I picked the right one, right? Yeah, 2020, then 2020, November 2020. And then if you look at that, I did a recovery back in 2020, November 20, right? November 19th. And I was able to recover in 3 minutes and 44 seconds. Interestingly, AWS is taking more time now, right? Which means a lot more people, a lot more stress on the AWS network, right? Public cloud, right? It is not like what used to be 15 years ago when I got on the cloud bandwagon 15 years ago, and now it's so much different. Like 15 years down the line, you can do everything over 5G, in some other edge cloud, right? So the capabilities will continue to enhance and continue to be modified, and the new services will be introduced. Are you really taking advantage of all of them, or are you really stuck with a legacy approach? Legacy backup and recovery as opposed to an application resilience approach by looking at the entire environment, the ability to understand your blueprint, right? That's the key. And that's what you could do with an application resilience product as opposed to typical backup and recovery product. Recovery completed. It took about 5 minutes and 7 seconds. All the logs are available, right? All the resources have been recovered, create completed, and it will be reset. The nice report is available, CSV report, PDF report. You can reset right now to be able to kind of completely delete all the resources. This PDF report, a nice report that you can send to your compliance officer, right? And then that gives you an idea of how long it took, how many resources, right? It's basically 6 compute, 46 different resources, right? And it mapping wise, it's source, destination. It maps automatic. Appranix automatically maps depending on the availability of the zone, right? Some regions may not have that many zones. How do you really map it? How do you know? Right? It used to be like 3 zones in the Virginia region. Now it is 6. Oregon had only 2. Started with 1, 2, and now 3. Right? How do you really take advantage of all of these wonderful capabilities available? How do you continuously decrease your cost of the DR protection by lowering the sizes of the instances? How do you actually do that? If you changed the size of the influence. Some instances, sometimes it's almost like changing the architecture. No, it's not really changing the architecture. If you really change the architecture, now you have to really get rid of some old databases and create all your databases using past systems or new load balancers, and take advantage of all the new services that are available. All right, so now you change the architecture of your application, and what's the blueprint of that one? Can I go to multiple DevOps pipelines to somehow understand all those Terraform scripts spread across 15 different pipelines and to be able to understand my blueprint? Is it possible at all? I thought we are modelizing all this infrastructure as code. Good thing, but how do I get back my environment, right? So that's what's possible now. And we are the enablers. Appranix is just an enabler of making sure that you can recover, making sure that you can automatically blueprint, making sure you can avoid all that risky DR blueprints, DR runbooks, and IP address mapping. Who does that anymore? Okay, all right, great. Let me stop here and see if there are questions. Right? If not, thank you. We'll distribute this to all the registered users, and hopefully you get an idea, and we'll go from there. Looks like no questions. Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time. We'll be in touch. Thank you.